Order. Uh, Recognizing that we have one person by participating by remote participation, just remember we have to poll on any votes that we might have. With that, anybody have any public comments or? Art, you're disappointing me. Yeah, there's no public comments of any sort? Okay. We're going to move forward to the approval of minutes. Has everybody had a chance to take a look at them? Entertain a motion?
I move they be approved as published.
Okay.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Clint, are you taking notes?
Yes.
Okay. Any comments about it? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. And we have the Housing 101 presentation.
Very good.
We have just taken our road trip through Harwich.
Yes, we had an excellent road trip right before the meeting, so thank you, Chairman Howell. I always
it over to
prefer
Avery.
Don, but
Don is
I don't
fine.
want, okay, good.
Don's better than fine. You should hear what they call me at home.
Okay, that's good. So I'm Jen Goldson, planning consultant. This is Avery Wolf. We're both from my company, J.M. Goldson, and we were here about a month or so ago. I can't remember the exact date. And we promised you that next time we'll bring our Housing Trust 101 presentation. And just, there's, you probably know a lot of this, but it's never hurts to kind of get a refresher on what can a trust do, what sort of how are they organized or how can they be organized, and what's the relationship between a housing trust and a housing partnership. And then Avery's going to talk about the work that we've done since we last saw you and the next steps. So if this sounds okay, I'm just going to launch right into this.
Floor's yours.
Perfect. All right. So the most simplistic, I suppose, way to describe what a trust is it's a place to put money. And the money's designated for creating and preserving affordable housing in the community. And, sorry about that. I did forget to change that. And so a housing trust is really just, it's very different from a housing partnership and a affordable housing committee and all those other entities that deal with housing in your community, because it's really about the money that you have. And I'm going to talk a lot about, well, what can you do with that money and how do you make those decisions? But when a trust is formed, it's also created alongside a board of trustees, and that's what you are. And your job is to, one, oversee the use of the funds, and you essentially are acting like a banker, but you can also initiate ideas. And this is a choice that housing trusts and boards who are managing these housing trusts make sometimes they're not conscious they've made this choice, but you can make the deliberate choice to say that we're going to be the kind of trust that creates an application, and we're going to sit back and we're going to wait for proposals to come to us, and then we're going to act on those proposals and decide which ones to fund. Other trusts, and most trusts in smaller communities, where if you sat back, you may be growing much older than you are now and never get a proposal, are initiators. And so you're still overseeing those funds, but you're also trying to come up with ideas for how to spend that money. And you've already gotten an advantage over a lot of trusts because you also have land. You don't just have money, but you have property. And so you are on your way to initiating ideas, which you're already starting to work on those ideas. And so I would view you, and this is something that you should discuss at some point in the process, is how do you view yourself? The way I'm viewing you now is that you're really an initiator. You're a group that's rolling up their sleeves and you're trying to get things to happen. But if you think that there's also a reason to have an application process and a call for applications, if you think that that's something that would be useful, we could talk about what that would look like. Some trusts do both of those things.
Just as, stop you for a second. What's your preference? You want to finish this, or would you like?
No,
if
questions
people-
throughout, I'd prefer, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so in real time, you just
Yeah,
want to hear things.
Yeah,
So
we just, I
th-
see it as a
We're
conversation.
at one of those junctures now, so that you might want to jump in, any of
Sure,
you. Larry,
absolutely.
too. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of how you see yourself,
Initiator versus
banker, kind of,
application processor.
yeah.
Well, I think the point you made, we have money, we have land, so yeah, the ball's in our court, so we might as well move forward.
Proactive.
Yeah, actually, absolutely.
You agree, Larry?
I do.
Okay, so that's where we're going to head with the plan.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So there are housing trusts all over Massachusetts. They started back in the 70s and went through the 80s and the 90s. As the way you created them was you had to go to the state legislature and ask for permission through your home rule. But in 2005, a statute was created to basically allow you to create your own trust without getting approval from the state, and that's what you did. There are about 100 trusts in the state. About something like 96, 97 of them were created through the 2005 statute. And the statute lays out powers and membership requirements that are sort of normalize the way trusts operate through the state. So housing trusts in your region, all of the communities, except it looks like Sandwich, have a housing trust on the Cape and the islands. Did you all know that already?
I
I
did not
did
know that,
not
no.
know that. They all
So
have
the-
trusts, or they all have,
Trusts, so the hatch is the trust, and, actually, let me go back.
Green is CPA.
Yeah, green is CPA, but the hatch that looks like this, the diamond shape,
Mhm.
is the trusts that predated or were formed outside of the 2005 statute.
Okay,
And then the diagonal ones were, the same as yours in the 2005,
'cause
per the statute.
doesn't Brewster have a partnership?
A
Or,
lot of these may have
Is
housing
that different?
partnerships. Yeah, we're gonna talk about that.
okay,
But the housing partnership is really an advocacy committee. It's not a committee that has a large pot of money and can own and do real estate transactions.
okay.
And a lot of these, possibly all of them, have housing partnerships or affordable housing committees. I don't know. That's not indicated
Yeah.
on this map. The
Okay.
green just means that there's Community Preservation Act
Mhm.
as well. So the real purpose is the statute uses these words, create and preserve. And so the question is, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to create and preserve housing? And so these are examples, and I find the best way to describe is not by providing a definition. The trust statute doesn't actually even provide a definition. I just like to use examples. And so there's two ways to create housing. You can either do it through new construction or through reuse of existing buildings. And these are examples of new construction here. We have, in Andover, we have a home ownership development. In Carlisle, there was a senior rental development, and these had other sources of funding too, especially the Carlisle one. The trust funds were just a small part of, and then you have Sudbury, did a habitat project. And so these are just examples. You've done a lot of work in Harwich already to create this, a lot of different types of affordable housing projects. So I think you're pretty familiar with how to create housing. I know you've had habitat projects and you've had all sorts of different projects through new construction. Then there's also doing projects through reuse of existing buildings. And so Eastham had run a rental unit conversion program for a long time. I don't think they're doing it anymore. I'm not sure if Linda might know. But they would buy smaller homes for the most part and create an affordable rental unit. They'd hold on, they still own those properties, and they hire a nonprofit, I think it's CDP still, to manage those. And they also did rehab on those properties. So that's one example
I think
of,
Hesh had shared that with CDP.
oh, is that right?
It's-
Okay, I didn't realize that.
Hesh has a fairly large rehabilitation presence up in Easttown.
Okay, so Hesh also, yeah, great. So, so that's just an example of how you can create housing units that are deed restricted. These happen to be rental in Eastham through existing units. Then the trust funds were used to both buy and to rehab the units. And then, of course, since the trust actually owns those properties, they're responsible for all maintenance and long-term carrying costs and everything.
Do you have any idea of how much they paid per,
I do, I don't have it here.
just a ballpark?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they've spent, I don't know if you know offhand, I wanna say it's certainly over $1 million just buying the properties. I don't know about,
I mean,
That I don't
per,
know.
on average.
yeah, I do have that, I just don't have it in front of me.
I'm thinking that we're roughly in $1 million right now. We could easily flush out our entire bank account with
Yeah.
4 houses.
It's an expensive way to create housing, because you have to buy the property, you're not getting a return on it, really, I mean, they get rent, but, you also have to, make sure, rehab it to start out with, and then you need to maintain that property over time.
I just wanted them to know
Yeah, it's an
what kind of bang
expensive
for the
way,
buck
and then
you'd
you
get
have
out
to
of that.
basically pay an entity to administer those for you.
Do you know if there's a report, kind of, 10 years in, what does it look like? Was it a good thing, bad, what are the
They,
SWOT analysis?
I think that, I don't know that they have anything formal, but from what I've heard through, we just did the community preservation plan and a strategic plan in Eastham. So what I heard through those processes were that the trust was feeling like this program was working, but they also want to spend their money to do new construction and sort of use some of their money to make a bigger bang happen. And this was a pretty expensive way to create a unit and to maintain the unit. So I think my understanding, this information is probably about a year old now. So, maybe things have changed, I'm not sure. But my understanding about a year ago was that they were moving away from doing this because they felt like it didn't make economic sense for them to continue to run that in the same way.
I'll tell you one thing that fed into that, and it was a practical problem, is that they were looking lead times that were like 18 months, 2 years. The progress was excruciatingly slow to get the purchase, to deploy the rehab. So eventually it got to the point where it wasn't aligning. They thought they'd have a whole bunch of them up front.
Right,
That's not what happened.
right, yeah, that's a good point too. The slowness of getting a unit to be fixed up and then occupied.
I'm just thinking of the Yarmouth, they bought a number of houses and fixed them up and sold them with deed restrictions. But that was and they did it in-house?
Not
From what-
entirely. What
No?
the bad surprise there is that Hesh is managing at least 6 of them for them.
Oh, they still own
Oh,
them?
so they still own some?
But they had other people operating them for them.
Interesting. I wonder if there's like reports on, so we can do like a,
I can do some research on that.
yeah, see if there's kind of
Get
a,
back to you.
this worked, this didn't work, if we did
Outcomes.
it again, how we would do it
Well,
differently.
I mean, it really wasn't that economical either, from what I gather, because the fact of the matter is that you guys have a charter line that's drawn on the other side of Harwich. So that would have been the Hack area. Hack passed on doing that despite the fact they're one town over.
Oh, is that right?
We
Yeah.
serve the lower 8 Cape Town, so starting from Brewster all the way to Provincetown.
But they had a bunch of them on Camp Street, and they were all like rehab things that they had bought, and they didn't flip them. They actually held them, but they didn't run them.
Okay. Well, I do have an ownership example, though. Norfolk has a buy-down program, and you can see right on their website, they advertise, are you selling your home? We're looking to buy homes for $395 or less. And they do some rehab to them, and then they sell them with a deed restriction to, income eligible home buyer, and then they don't own them anymore. And so they've done, I think, just a few units each year. I don't remember how much, what their revenue levels are like in the trust, but my memory is that they do a couple units a year. So you're not gonna create, unless you have a large amount of
Right.
revenue to spend, you're not gonna create a lot of units at once. It's gonna be a couple here, a couple there. But they've been doing that program for a long time, and,
Larry, I want to get you in on this, but the other thing is, when we did the driving tour, it's even more starkly obvious that as you drive around Harwich, we're really doing a bang-up job with purchase houses, affordability, not so much in rentals.
What do you mean?
Ownership.
Ownership, all of Driftwood, I shared this with our friends at the other side of the table, but I will share it with you. Harwich used to have a Harwich Community Development Corporation. It was just for Harwich.
Okay.
All of Driftwood was built
Was
with that.
built with that, okay. And that was,
And they
20
have
years
deed
ago?
restrictions, but they're quirky because they're based on a percentage of home cost. It had nothing to do with your earning capacity. So they had, one by one, there's been an effort made to convert the deed restrictions to affordability on the basis of income rather than the basis of parity with other housing. After that those were all purchased. In the mid-2000s, Habitat was chosen on town property on Gomes Way, which is right off of Driftwood,
yeah,
to build those houses. Those are all ownership houses. Essentially, that leaves you with the Hesh stuff, and mostly that's South Harwich and Sisson Road, and then the 3 phases Pine Oaks that are the large, the rental capacity places. But we haven't really done a heck of a lot in rentals. It's mostly been, ownership. I'm only mentioning that because there's an egregious problem in rental. We don't have a lot of rentals in
Right.
general, never mind, earmark. You've got the Davenport rentals, you've got, the Main Street rental here. And there's a certain amount of resistance to rentals, but the practical thought here is if you want to do numbers, you got to come up with some point with affordable rentals. In all of these, unless you're going to go excruciatingly slow, all of these are going to be home ownership things. You flip them, you get money back, you go back out and do it again. And the question we have to decide is, where are we going to prioritize? Just bringing it up. I don't have an answer. I'm just.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's something we should continue to discuss through the process, but that'll be important to talk through and get some clarity on. The other term that the statute uses that you're allowed to use the funds on, so those are examples of how you create units, right? Either through new construction or through reuse of existing buildings. The other term the statute uses is preserve, and so that means preserving existing affordable units. And this is an example in Amherst. This was not actually trust funded, but it could have been. I think it was CPA funded. But this was a apartment complex that was, funded decades ago.
Yeah.
And they basically, the developer or the owner paid off the mortgage and didn't have to reserve that certain percentage of units as affordable anymore. So they were going to be evicting the tenants and creating market rate units out of those units. So Amherst was going to lose affordable units that way. And so what they did was they worked with MHP and the town and the state to really create a deal where a new developer came in, bought it. The CPA funds, I don't remember how much they put towards it, but they used Community Preservation Act funds. Like I said, it's not a trust project, but it
Right.
just as easily could be. But this is the type of thing that you can do to preserve existing affordable units. And we did look at, this is just one of your pages of your subsidized housing inventory for Harwich. And we did notice, and some of these, DHCD is giving us a slightly old version because they're in the process of updating them. So some of these numbers may be wrong because you've already preserved some of these units. But the SHI lists, you can see, actually I have a little thing here. You can see this column is the term of if it's perpetual, meaning the deed restrictions are good forever. That's what perp means. But then if you go down, you see a date, 2019, 2040, 2042, 2030, et cetera. And so that means that whatever affordable units are in these properties are set to expire, and they'll be taken off your subsidized housing inventory at that time in those years unless they're saved from expiring, essentially.
Right.
And again, this list is slightly old, so I think some of these may not be an issue. Some of these are so far away that you know, you don't really need to deal with them right now, but it's something to be aware of and that we would want to look at with you. Are there any, you know, imminent ones that you're going to lose, and does that become something the trust wants to use its funding for?
Speaking of looking, is there any chance of putting this as a download or something?
Sure.
Because it's really hard to tell from this. I having a tough time telling
Yeah,
from that.
and we can also just
As
give
we
you
get
this whole
deeper
list.
into this, we probably want to.
We can give you this whole list, and what we should do is check with DHCD and see if they can update any of these.
I have a
I
copy.
Do you
got-
have-
Oh, you have an update? Great.
This is not this is the most recent copy
Okay,
that
that
they
must
have.
be the same one.
But January 17th, as you all know, I recently submitted documents to preserve Pine Oaks Village 2, and I've been working with Al Eaton to
That's
get
what you
the
visited.
updated documents.
Okay, great. Okay, good.
And I believe that this copy that we have is, I got from you and Andrea, so.
Oh, yes,
I
it's,
think it's
it's the
same.
most recent one.
Okay, good. Okay, so where do trust funds come from? They can come from the Community Preservation Act, which is where you've gotten some or all of your funds from. Just remind me, I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Gotten some from town meeting last year.
Yeah, they're all. Yeah, but
They're all
CPA.
CPA.
They're all
They're all
They're all
CPA.
CPA,
Yeah.
okay.
Actually, no, it's not 100% because we get about $30,000 a year for
tower.
a lease for the cell tower.
Yeah, okay.
And the
Trust, right.
selectmen vote annually to dump that money into the trust
So that's about
coffers.
30,000,
Yeah.
okay, and the rest is CPA?
Yeah.
Great. And so you can see a bunch of different revenue sources. You can see cell tower leases is on that list, and CPA. There are also inclusionary zoning payments, which I don't remember if Harwich has inclusionary zoning, so that's not relevant to you. But if you did adopt inclusionary zoning at some point, which would be basically requiring a market rate development to include some affordable units. It's based on usually a percentage of the units be affordable. And as an alternative to creating those units, some of the bylaws also allow developers to pay into the trust, as an example, of instead of building the affordable units on the development, they would give money to the trust. So that's just another way. Some trusts have gotten revenue. You can also negotiate with developers in certain situations, and that's not something you can count on, but sometimes it happens, and the town gets money that's designated for affordable housing, it can go into the trust.
Is that kind of a workaround around 40B?
It would,
Or,
yeah, I mean, no, they would be probably going through your zoning bylaw,
yeah,
so they wouldn't be asking for a 40B in that case, yeah.
so just digging down to the local.
Yeah, and that may not be something that's relevant here, but I know that in other places, they've been able to get some fees that way.
It could be, but we'd have to have somebody watching it. Larry,
Yes.
I'm going to give them an object lesson here. We have a sidewalk fund in lieu of, putting sidewalks in on subdivisions. How many times have you actually seen real money go into that?
I didn't quite get the whole question, but there's about $35,000 or $40,000, if my memory serves me correct in that.
Yeah,
I
we
don't
started
know-
the fund 22 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know that they've spent very much of it, but it could. It could probably. It would probably take a vote of the town meeting, but you could probably repurpose that into other uses.
That wasn't my point. My point was if you were going to do an inclusionary bylaw and it was going to be under the jurisdiction of a regulatory body like the planning board, and there wasn't any other outside oversight, I'm not overly sure we would ever collect anything of meaning.
Okay,
No, to ask that question, Boston tends to do that, and they do it with developments over either 3 or 5 units, and depending on the size of the unit, it usually runs to about anywhere between 10 and 14%, if my memory serves me correct, of the total. So technically, a 100-unit development would require 14 units of affordable housing, and they just do it. They just built right into the thing, and there's 2 options for that. One would be to actually provide the housing. The other one would be, in lieu of providing the housing, you would provide about $300,000 for each unit you didn't build.
If I thought we would hold to that, they might have some
Correct.
appeal. But I guess my point is, if they said they wanted it all market, our history with things that that allow you to pay in lieu of has not been stellar.
Yeah, it would be an option. It would take, if my memory serves me correct, it takes a new bylaw that the town would have to enact. Obviously, since it's a finance bylaw, it would have to go through the town meeting. And you would likely as not get some pushback from that. There was pushback in Boston, but once it was put into effect, it effectively isn't money out of your own pocket. It's effectively money out of somebody else's pocket. It works relatively well, and they probably created, I would think, Don, somewhere north of 1,000 plus units of housing with that money.
I guess my only point is we'd have to be really careful in that area because we have no history in it. We're not really good at it.
Yeah.
Yes, you'd have options, but as we talked before, I think we've discussed this in the meetings, that we could think of finding a piece of land that is more viable for market rate housing, sell that land and use it to put into the fund, makes life much easier.
We discussed that in the car.
Yeah, yeah, and so on here is tax title sales, which isn't exactly what you're talking about, but some towns don't designate some of the funds they get from tax foreclosed properties where people don't pay their taxes and the town takes the land, then they sell them, they have to pay off the back taxes, but then they can also designate some funds to go into the Affordable Housing Trust. Some communities have bonded to give the trust funds, some have used their general fund. Others have done a tax override, so there's different ways, but another way that, yeah, Don was just mentioning, is if you had property, you could sell it, it's an asset, and then put that fund back, whatever proceeds you make from that sale back into the trust and use it then to create or preserve housing. Okay, so let's talk about the different roles and different responsibilities of these various entities you have in the community that are really the three I listed here are the Housing Partnership or Affordable Housing Committee, but I think you call it a partnership here, is that right? Oh, is it the committee? I looked on the town website and actually couldn't find, I might have just looked too fast.
Well, we have a housing.
It's a housing committee.
Not,
Committee.
It doesn't have the word
Doesn't-
affordable in
doesn't
it,
have
but
Oh,
that's
it
what
doesn't
is.
have the word affordable, okay. So the Housing Committee, then you have the trust, and then I just threw in the Housing Authority, even though it's, a little, obviously, all of these are different from each other. So the Housing Committee, typically, when there is a housing trust, is solely focused on policy work. So they look at what kind of zoning can we put in place to help us create housing that meets our housing need. How do we feel about potential 40B applications, and they weigh in. They often end up being advocates for housing when it makes sense. Obviously they're not bound to love every 40B that comes along, but their job is really to focus on the policy in the community. Whereas the trust, as I had mentioned before, you have, the thing that's special about you is you have money and land in your case, and you get to decide how to spend it. Typically, trusts don't focus on policy and zoning and 40Bs and weighing in on that. Of course, you live in the community and you care about those things, so you may want to have some input into it, but that's not your primary focus. If you're looking to really distinguish yourself from your already existing housing committee versus the housing trust, you're all about the money and the land, and they're all about policy and trying to promote housing that makes sense in the community. Does that
Yes.
seem reasonable to?
Just had a joint meeting with
Absolutely.
our friends in the committee last week.
Talked about that?
Talked about just that.
Good, okay. And then the Housing Authority, really, they own affordable housing, and I don't know in Harwich, but they usually administer rental vouchers as well.
we do.
And that's their
Yeah.
role. They don't usually get too involved in policy or what the trust does with its funds, although it could potentially ask for trust funds if, I'm not suggesting this or saying that it's the case, but sometimes housing authorities want to build more housing on their land, on surplus land. Just so you know, one thing that comes up sometimes is if housing units are old and need to be rehabbed, can the trust fund that? And the short answer is no, because you're not creating or preserving housing in the way that preservation is preserving the affordability of a unit. Now, the
Our
only
lawyer has given us a vast gray answer to that.
yeah, the only exception to that, I would say, is if you're using Community Preservation Act funds in your trust, you can preserve affordable housing units what a lot of people think in the kind of the housing world is that CPA preservation was meant to preserve expiring uses. But that's not what the statute says for CPA statute, was I'm talking about now. What it says is to protect the resource from harm. And so people have argued, including there's a memo from the Department of Housing and Community Development that states housing authorities could get CPA funds if they were to do preservation activities, but not for rehab activities. And you're saying, well, aren't those the same thing? And normal person would say, yeah, those are basically the same thing, but when you look at the actual way the CPA statute's written, it's distinct from each other. So rehab is things like extending the life of, like, say the roof is just old, it's not leaking, it's not broken in any way, it's just old, it's exceeded its lifespan. Putting a new roof would be rehab. Or let's say bringing the electricity up to code or the plumbing up to code. It's not broken, it's not harming the structure, or the structure's not at risk of harm, at least not immediate risk of harm. That would all be rehab. Creating ADA, creating handicap ramps, elevator, that's all rehab, and that's not allowed by CPA or the trust, because rehab is not a term that's used in either the trust statute, and for CPA funds, you can only do rehab if you created the housing through CPA to begin with.
This is a Palinda thing. We're going to take this as a note to self.
Okay.
We had a presentation by KP Law at one point. This may be a nomenclature or term of art thing.
Yeah.
They delineated the difference between rehab and repair, and that one you could do and one you couldn't do.
They're
with
probably
trust
saying
funds.
repair is like preservation.
Well, they use the rehab part, word,
Yeah.
but the point was that Eastham has a rehab program, Brewster has a rehab
Brewster.
program,
Some
Harwich has a rehab program.
communities do it anyway, yeah, and there's no case law, I'm not saying it's illegal, there's no case law on it, but, for,
The
you
reason I
know,
brought those communities up is they all have trusts, the Brewster,
Mm-hmm.
Eastham.
Yeah.
And they're doing it through their trusts.
yeah, and I would say that a lot of communities don't interpret the statute as strictly as this. But, you know, I'm not here to give you a legal opinion.
Well, we probably need to make another run at KP Law.
Yeah, I would say if you,
Delineate exactly what it is, based on this
if
presentation.
you get a legal opinion that says you can do something, then you don't need to listen to me, because I'm not a lawyer. All I can tell you is what other lawyers have said, and the, you know, DOR, but when something goes, you don't really know until something goes to court. That's
For
when
us,
you
it's
actually
important to
know.
figure this out right now, because if
Yeah.
we, as part of our action plan, say we do want to decide, because we've talked about rehab. If we want to include that as one of the legs on the stool for affordable housing, I'd like to know where the edges are.
Yeah, then
Can
I
I
think
just
that,
interrupt really quickly? Larry lost connection.
oh,
Oh,
Larry's gone.
glad you noticed that. Yeah, it would be good to get
I
a
think he
written
picked up his
opinion, if
phone.
you can, to kind of hang your hat on that.
He just needed to get to the kitchen.
Now, can I just ask a question just for clarity? Are you talking about, like, buying old units and rehabbing them, or
No,
are you
rehabbing in
talking about
place.
That's
rehabbing
different.
in place? Okay,
place.
I just wanted to make sure I was
Yeah,
following.
so the
If we
reason
were,
that
if we
it's
were to
okay.
buy, then we could rehab.
Exactly, because you
Okay.
just
Can't-
use, first of
We
all, you
just
just
can't
use the
5
money
years
to buy
down the
it. And
road.
so
Yes.
you can rehab something that you bought with CPA funds. This is,
Yes.
I
Okay.
know we're mixing the waters a little bit, but I'm talking about CPA, but because most of your funds are CPA, then you can use the same rules. So that's okay, because you're doing the rehab to create the unit. It wasn't an affordable housing unit before. But what I'm talking about are things that are already affordable housing units that might just need new plumbing, new fixtures, I don't know, rehab in some way, handicap accessibility. And according to the CPA statute, and if that's where your money is coming from, then you need to follow that statute. Rehab are things that, you know, are extending the life, bringing it up to code, including handicap codes, including
I gotcha.
building
Yeah.
codes, building and safety codes. Preservation, rather, is if something's broken, if something's harming the building, like let's say the roof is actually leaking and you're getting water in the building. That's preservation, because you're protecting the actual housing from harm. Because if you let that leak go, you're not gonna have housing after a while.
Yeah, we're not gonna resolve this today anyway. I promise you,
Okay.
we'll bring this back to the lawyer.
Yeah, but you
I just
kinda
wanted to,
get, you
yeah,
kinda
make
get
sure
what
I
I'm
was following
saying,
it
in
correctly.
terms of the way I'm
Absolutely.
interpreting it.
I do just want to add, we do have a housing rehabilitation program through CDBG home funds. And
Yeah, the
that's,
community block, yeah.
That's different, yeah.
that's completely different.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm
But
happy to,
not, the ones that I'm talking about are actually through trusts, they're not, development grant.
yeah, I know the ones you're talking about
Okay.
too. I'm happy to help craft.
I'll find where the line is, we'll ask the lawyer,
And I'm
because
happy to help
ultimately, whatever
craft
they
the
say is what they
question,
say.
if you wanna craft the question in a way that really tests what I just said against. And I would defer to your town council, like, meaning me. If town council came and said, this is perfectly fine, then I would defer to that, and I wouldn't,
It's in that first
Any
meeting
issue
we
with
did.
that.
Yeah.
In the small
Yeah.
conference room, so.
But it's kind of a moot point anyway, because I don't think we're anticipating having our own.
We may, that's the point, this
May,
action plan
okay.
may actually have a component in it. It'd be
Okay.
nice to know whether it's legal.
Yeah. So under your bylaw, it says that you possess all of those powers in the statute, basically. Some communities have limited the powers of the trust and required certain levels, either they take some powers away or they create levels of oversight, but you don't have that. The only thing it says here is that the selectman member of the trust shall report to the full Board of Selectmen when you purchase or sell property. But you don't need additional approval to do that. It also says that you need to work with the housing committee to develop an affordable housing plan and update it, give it to the trust. So you probably know that, but I thought it was good to just
Yeah.
highlight that. Okay, so that's really, maybe we went through things fast. I don't know if you thought that was fast or slow, but.
That's great.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So Avery's gonna jump into now what we're doing in the project and what we've done in the past month or so since we've seen you, and next steps.
Yeah. So first, I just want to say thank you to everybody that's helped me gather information and input over the last few weeks. We're really excited to really get going with this and kind of delve into the meaty material. So yeah, I just want to remind you, we're excited that you guys really recognize this need for an action plan and to kind of ground yourselves and figure out what your goals and priorities will be, potential initiatives, and even the component too, specifically to engage the community and get that buy-in. So I want to point you to, I handed this first draft background chapter out to you all. It's more meaty than I think we need to go through today, but I just wanted to give that draft out to you guys and give you the chance to look at it. If you could, I'll go over this later, but I'll ask you guys to give me any feedback or comments that you have on it over the next few weeks. So it really just gives a background about your trust. There's a little bit of information generally about affordable housing in the state, a little bit of information about affordable housing in your community, SHI status based on the information that we have now, and any new information that comes in as we're going through this process, I can absolutely go back and update. This will just be one component of the plan, so we'll be working on it continually as we go. And then the last piece is a review of relevant planning initiatives and documents from the past few years. So I have kind of an overview of some of the needs and issues brought up in your 2016 HPP, the Housing Production Plan, the Comprehensive Plan, the Open Space and Recreation Plan, and then a little bit just from your forum that you had last spring. I looked at the slides from that and some of the information you presented, as well as the land inventory tracker that Andrea shared with me, just to get a sense of some of the decisions you guys have made so far, priorities you've identified, things you've thought about. So that's all in there. The other thing that I will point out, we've given you full larger scale versions, but they're also embedded in this chapter are some map examples that we pulled up based on the properties identified in Article 61 from last year's town meeting. And we realized in the card that I think potentially there's one property that's missing on here. I went back and looked at Article 61 and didn't see it, but we can coordinate about that to make sure that we've got everything covered. So the first map is a look at environmental constraints. So you can kind of peruse that. There's identified flood zones, wetlands, and vernal pools, and we've added the light yellow and orange pieces are the buffer zones, so there's a
Just show
100-foot.
them which map you're looking at. I think
Yes.
everyone's looking at something different.
Sorry, this is this bluish purple map. So there's the lighter yellow is a 100-foot buffer zone around wetlands, and then there's also 50-foot buffer zone, which comes from both the state and local wetland regulations. So those are just things that are good to look at and consider when you're thinking about, what is the feasibility of development on these parcels. And again, this is just Mass GIS data. It will take a lot more on the ground studying to kind of figure out exactly what the limitations are, but this gives you kind of a first sense. And then the second map is really about development, and this one is a little bit more detailed. This is the really green one. It's a little bit more detailed and might be a little bit harder to distinguish some of the different categories, land use categories. But I thought this one, we have two versions, and I can actually share both with you. One that's a little bit less detailed, but this one I thought was really interesting because it does show the different types of housing uses and commercial uses, which I think is kind of interesting to look at from a perspective of what is the context around these parcels that you're looking at and that are under your jurisdiction right now.
And if it's helpful at some point, we can just zoom in to these parcels and, give you more detailed maps, but we thought we'd just show you the full picture first.
You folks will note that we're not looking at Earl Road.
Yes, yeah, Earl Road is the
And
one.
there's still yet to be resolved jurisdiction. There's a difference between it's owned by the municipality and who in the municipality owns it. It may very well have been given to the town, and Chris had not pursued that before. It might have been given to the town for the purposes of recreation, in which case it falls under a particular MGL, and it would be very difficult without their acquiescence.
Yep.
To get that property, despite the fact that town meeting voted on it, because it would take more than that.
So then I also wanted to give you
And I'm not giving up on it.
Yes, yeah, of course. No, and we can talk more about that to kind of figure out the details of, who has jurisdiction and everything.
And we've discussed in the car, and we've discussed this in various meetings prior to this, the reason we don't want to give up on that particularly is that at the end of the day, if there's any prospect of doing it, we may not build there. I mean, Larry, you and I have talked about this, we might flip the property and get a whole lot more acreage somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's definitely something we don't want to lose sight of. So I definitely want to be sure to incorporate that. So I know that some of you, hopefully all of you know that I sent out this short survey, kind of a follow-up to some of the questions that I asked you in our last meeting. And so I just wanted to report back a little bit of what we heard. We heard from trust members and some staff members. So I asked what people considered were the most pressing housing needs in the community, and these were some of the things that came up. Rental, the things with asterisks were brought up by multiple people. So those are things that were more common. So workforce and middle class housing opportunities, rental, diversity of housing options, affordable housing, and community engagement around housing needs.
Are they in order or just
Nope, yep, that's just,
random?
really rental is the only thing that came up multiple times explicitly.
It's because I didn't respond. Number one would have been mine too, workforce.
Yeah, so, and I can keep that open too for anyone that didn't respond yet. I mean, it's really just for us to get a sense of the lay of the land before we really dive into the bulk of the project. There's more coming that will help us kind of determine and piece out some of these needs and ideas. But I can leave that open, and if you guys still want to respond to it, I'm happy to do that, and we can take that information. It's always good to have that.
And I did have a conversation with Laura Schufelt earlier today to share with you folks that part of this is driven not just, and you're going to see that too when we're talking about the RFP, not only what our wish list is, but what our feasibility list would be. So while we were talking, and I would love to see something that's 75-25 with workforce housing and affordable housing, and so we could get the biggest bang out of the project that we could possibly do, it may require equity from us that we're not capable of doing. because these projects are all done within a financial bubble where everybody else is competing across the state for certain funds, like MHP has funds or grants, and you may not be able to achieve the market part of this at the lower end of the market with enough of an inducement to get a developer to do it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying yes or no, I'm just saying that there's a reality component to all of this stuff, is that we need to do at least X amount to qualify for capital A affordability. But if our desire is you get mixes of workforce that are affordable, then we're gonna have to be more in on, do we give them the land? Are we gonna give them money, or a combination of land and money? Because it has to be able to be economically viable.
So I also asked about housing obstacles and challenges. I think the question specifically said what obstacles or challenges exist that make it difficult to achieve those needs or to address those needs that you identified in question 1. And so some of the things, again, that came up were zoning and the Zoning Board of Appeals, and specifically for multifamily. I think that's something that came up in our last meeting too, that I think is already beginning to be addressed. I remember you guys saying that there's some momentum to try to think about kind of loosening the zoning restrictions or regulations around that.
We've already done accessory dwelling units.
Okay, great.
That's a fairly recent one.
Yeah. And then, yeah, lack of knowledge and public perception, the NIMBYism, feeling like people, aren't sure what affordable housing is, that all of that definitely plays a role. The trend and increasing trend for seasonal and vacation, second homes, and then lacking a definitive housing plan. I know the last one was updated in 2016, the last HPP. So then I also asked what people thought they felt the priorities or focus of the trust should be. Obviously, people are really focused on getting this action plan done, which is a great first step, and kind of championing that first project that can be an example and a showcase to the town. Promote ADUs. It's great to know that that is a recent success, zoning-wise. And then working to establish and strengthen reputation and build relationships. I know that's something that came up in our discussions too. And then the last one was an RFP for services for next year. And then again, similarly, I asked what challenges are in place that might impede some of those priorities or focuses or things that just might come up. I think along with this first one was that you have a great team. It's just a matter of rolling up your sleeves and doing it. Again, a need for housing plan and this action plan, a need to build assets, and how to figure out with other entities. I think that relates back to the strengthening reputation and building those relationships. And then again, going back to the community engagement and public perception. And then a missing fifth member is the last thing that came up. So I want to think about next steps. I know that I've been in communication with you, Dawn, about this, and you all have heard that we're trying to collect a list of stakeholders. So I'm going to be scheduling visionary phone call interviews with 4 key stakeholders that Dawn helped me identify, just in the interest of time, to get those scheduled over the next 2 weeks. So that will be, really nitty-gritty conversations where I can get a sense.
You can share the names because they should know.
Yeah, absolutely. I have the list here.
Richard
so it's
Waystack
gonna
is
be
the one.
Richard Waystack, Council on Aging, Dawn, Tom Peterson, Hesh, and Cindy Williams from the Chamber of Commerce.
Great.
If you guys had any thoughts on that, it was just an attempt to see people who over the long term were interested in this.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that'll be happening over the next few weeks, and I will write up a quick summary that I can share with you guys for the next meeting. But that's really just, again, to kind of lay the land and get a sense of what people are thinking and kind of help inform vision and goals and potential initiatives for the trust. And then we want to schedule focus groups for March, which this will be slightly larger, but still small groups of stakeholders. And that's what we asked for your input on, to think of a comprehensive list of people that might be good to invite to those focus groups. So they're usually, we try to aim for 5 to 10 people per group, and we'll have 4 sessions over one day in the afternoon and evening. And I'll talk a little bit later about dates for that. And then the community forum, we want to schedule for early April, which this is really a chance for you guys to engage with the public and both share information, educate, but also to collect some input and buy-in on potential priorities and initiatives.
I might want to jump in here because if you guys look at that timeline, I think it may be somewhat ambitious because we don't operate in a vacuum. There's a reason why the seat isn't full at the moment. We're operating with an acting town administrator rolling in on a very, very difficult budget to town meeting, which is in early May. And the ability for us to draw on assets, permanent employees in the town to be able to help with that on that timeline is probably ambitious.
So what
Okay.
if we switch the community forum till after town meeting?
I think
Would that
that would
be
be
helpful?
better,
You might
so
even
it
be able
doesn't
to help us promote it
confuse.
at town meeting.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
fine. That's a great idea.
So maybe like mid-May, or when is town meeting? It's early May?
Early May.
First week of May, I think, this year.
So maybe end of May?
Mid to late May?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Later would be better because earlier is the elections then if there happens to be any.
Yeah, we'd be happy
Yeah,
to do
yeah,
that.
like
Absolutely.
I think for the focus groups, it would be good to do those next month, just so we can keep moving. And also, March is still 2 months before town meeting, so
That's
that would
fine, I'm
be-
just saying
okay,
that
good,
Yep.
if there was heavy lifting kind of regulatory type stuff,
yep,
there's
that
not gonna
makes
be anybody
sense.
helping us.
yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, do you want to go to the,
in-
or I can do
Oh,
this.
sorry.
Sorry, what were you going to
Sorry.
say?
I was just thinking in terms of the list of stakeholders, I know we've talked about this before, and I know you've been in conversations with everyone, but usually what we suggest is different members of boards and committees, like you can have the Community Preservation Committee represented on the focus groups, you can have the other select board members, you can have Finance Committee, you can think about all the different town officials who will have an opinion on how the trust funds are used. And then I would also do other stakeholder groups. You may do other, maybe Hesh, in addition to talking on the telephone, you may do other advocates in the community. And I would also do other entities who just care about land development and what you're doing with these parcels and things like that. So it could be up to 40 people if you did 10 people for each focus group. So it's a decent amount of people. And I don't know, I didn't mean to butt in, I don't know where
No,
you
no, no,
stand on
that's fine.
the list exactly.
I think it's still in the works.
I have a draft.
Oh, good.
Based
Yeah.
on the 3 responses that I received. So I typed it in a spreadsheet. Again, this is just a draft. And we can modify and finalize as we progress. And then also, we have this document, Coalition Building Ideas. So we have different core groups and partners throughout the Cape that you can kind of highlight and kind of pick from, depending on what you guys are interested in.
Thank you for doing that. That's very helpful. So yeah, I think the biggest thing would just be that if we're keeping the focus groups in probably mid to late March, we want to get those invites out as soon as possible, since I know people's calendars get crazy. So if we could try to kind of finalize this within the next week or so, that would be great. And I can follow up after this meeting to make sure that we do that.
And we usually just do a sign-up genius, so the people on the list can go into a link, sign up for the time that works for them, and then it's all automatic, and then you limit it to 10 people each, so it'll all be
Yeah.
easy to manage once the email goes out.
So I can propose new dates for the forum in May, and we can follow up about that later. But I think that we were hoping to maybe solidify the date for the focus groups today. I had proposed March 19th, 24th, or 25th.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to, Belinda, I'm gonna give you some extra ones because right out of the gate, the Sisson Road project behind
yeah.
the junior theater theater. There's two relevant entities that we don't have anything on here about. The Harwich Center Initiative, which is an economic-driven group, and then there's the Historic and Historic District Commission, who we will have to go through in order to build anything there. Not that we're going to recreate history, but it's really important, you know, that they be part of the discussion, because they kind of fit together too. The historic people are going to opine on what it looks like, but the Harwich Center Initiative is trying to piece together how can you have economic activity going on there, you know, like within walking distance of things, and so they're definitely stakeholders.
So do you guys feel like we could make a decision about focus groups today?
Sure.
Okay. And I don't necessarily, I mean, it would be great if you guys want to join and, you know, be present for those. I don't necessarily think that it's required. I mean, I will be putting together a summary of everything that happens and sharing that with you, with those discussions.
And we would just ask if you did attend, that you're not a participant, you're there to observe, because we're learning what these stakeholders think you should be doing. And so we wouldn't ask you to sign up or be part of that 10, you would kind of sit, we would just ask that you're an observer there.
And in truth, I would give it a second run, because I haven't had an opportunity to talk to you folks since Andrea sent out the email. Give it a second run in your head. I think Larry understood that. Some of these stakeholders might be the opposite of what you're thinking of. They might hold resistance points as stakeholders, that we don't want to see this, we don't want to do that, and it's important to listen to that, because you're going to find during the process you're going to run up against it anyway. You might as well, and they may wind up have unfounded fears that you will never have heard until it's too late, unless you put them through the process up front.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, we definitely want to get all the voices and input, even the ones that, you know, might go against what.
And this is going to be awkward, because I'm normally the beacon of open meetings, but I've got to say, to a certain degree, some of these workshops, in order for them to be functional, can't be TV events. I mean, they gotta be nitty gritty. Let's talk about stuff where we're not worried about how we're gonna look on television.
Yeah, our focus groups, we definitely encourage that kind of setting. We really want people to feel like they can be raw and real about, you know, sharing this input. And like I said, we'll put together a summary that won't name any names. It'll just kind of give a general overview of what came out of the discussion.
Are the invitations open to the general public?
No,
No.
it's just the list of
It's a focus
stakeholders.
So,
But let me point out, because I see where you're going,
thank you.
that no decisions about any actions will be taking place at any of these meetings.
There's no deliberation.
They are this kind of a meeting. We're hearing what it is you're saying, but nothing is going to be decided. It'll be brought back, correlated, and then discussed about what we do with that data.
Yes.
Yeah, and actually, one of the ways we use the focus groups, we do this in almost all of our projects, you know, not just housing plans and trust plans, but the master plan work we do. We use the information that we gather to create the public forum. So we design the public forum based on what we heard and what we think are issues that need to really be discussed. So we use it to make the process more informed going forward, but yeah, no decisions are made. It's us listening.
I saw the look of panic.
Could I make a recommendation?
Go ahead.
Perhaps for the 4 in-depth interviewees, to keep things more, not open, on the contrary, but to make sure it's inclusive. Perhaps invite a female who's been on the Board of Selectmen at some point in the last 30 years. There's a handful of female select persons.
Oh, yeah. Shirley Gomes is one of them that is interested
Shirley
in that.
Gomes, just to have a.
Sandy Hall might be.
Sandy Hall, I think, would be a great, just so that we really have for the general public has a sense that we're getting.
I don't disagree. As a matter of fact, I thought that 4 was probably a somewhat limiting.
Well, I would also say, Don, that we have so much access to you, and we just did the tour with you, and I feel like we'll be talking to you.
It doesn't have to be, but
Yeah.
I think that 4 is probably still, another one I had thought of before that I hadn't thought of was Robin Wilkins, because
Yeah.
he's been involved in housing for 20-some-odd years
Yeah.
in Harwich.
That's a possibility too.
But
He's
you're
doing
right. I
great.
mean, I was
Yeah.
thinking that maybe 6, and she's absolutely right. There's probably a couple of,
We can do 6, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to give us a couple more names,
I
that's
think
fine.
Sandy Hall is, she's,
Sandy and Shirley might be.
and Shirley
both of them.
Gomes, Sandy Hall and Shirley Gomes. And then you really have a nice okay, I am
And it
pushing
all
the
might create a
female,
bit of
but-
a problem with, it's not a Facebook thing, what you talk about then, that shouldn't go on Facebook, so we gotta be very careful about that.
Yes, but we also
I think
have
we
to
can
make
tell her that
sure
up
that
front.
everybody, we need to make sure that all voices in town are heard if it's gonna be behind closed doors. And therefore, there maybe not be any comments on Facebook, ever, right? That's the goal.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
The other thing to think about, Larry, is you definitely want to have at least a generational background as well as being
Absolutely.
female selectmen, because there are some people, you've seen evidence of that over the last 10 or 15 years on the Board of Selectmen. There's some people who've moved here, become a selectman after 6 or 7 years, and don't really have a feel for what came before them.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, I can follow up to schedule those calls, and add those people to the list, for sure.
And that might want to be your opening foray to something. It's like, this is not going to be taken as a banner behind an airplane and towed around town. It's just us talking.
Yes.
And there wouldn't be a focus group for abutters to the properties we currently own. You wouldn't do a focus group. That would be more of the
I
forum.
would invite them to the forum.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's invited to the forum,
Of course,
but
yeah.
you could do specific outreach to
Yep.
those abutters.
Just curious. Okay, thanks.
So I don't know if it would just be helpful if you guys have any input on these dates for the focus groups. Let's see, the 19th is a Thursday, the 24th and 25th are Monday, Tuesday.
This is March.
Yes.
Yeah.
At
this is
what
in March.
time of the day are you contemplating this?
So we would do 4 hour-long sessions with about a half hour in between, just a little break, and enough time to run over a little bit if we need to. And I forget exactly the start times that I had originally thought of, but it would be like a afternoon into the evening. So running probably from 3 to 6.
You have 3
7.
PM,
7.
4:15, 5:30, and 6:45.
Okay, thank you.
What do you guys
And
think?
the dates one more time, the 19th?
19th, 24th, or 25th, which is Thursday or the following Monday or Tuesday.
Essentially, they're doing this on our behalf, so what do you folks think?
I understand.
Oh, you do want us there, or you do,
You don't
No,
need to be
you don't
there.
need to be there.
They're doing this on our behalf. What do you think in terms of the times and everything? Is that like
Oh.
something that you think would work in the community?
Any of those dates work for me.
and what were could you read the hours again?
Sure, 3 PM, 4:15, 5:30, and 6:45.
Yeah, I think that's a nice,
Okay, just
And-
wanted to make sure everybody has an opinion.
It doesn't
think
go too
so.
late, and it gives people daytime as well.
yeah. And they'll have time to adjust their schedules.
Yeah, for sure.
Just to clarify, these focus groups, it's through the stakeholders, or, okay.
Yeah,
So I
so-
guess I also should check and kind of cross-reference if they have meetings
Yeah,
That's
that would be
kind of
good.
what I'm
that
driving
day.
at.
Yeah.
And then there are gonna be places like out of Cape Healthcare and Cape Cod Healthcare that's their working hours, and the later hours are bad.
Yeah.
Right.
And so you want 40 people in this focus group?
No more than.
Yeah,
No more
basically
than
it could be
40.
between 20 and
Do
40.
you want to do it 8 in the morning?
Mail me the responses if you're doing that.
So why don't we follow up with each other to solidify a date? We can figure out those details, because it would be helpful to know if there's one day that a ton of meetings fall on, so it would be a really bad
Right.
idea
Yeah.
to host something that day.
I think if we don't have to be there, then it's really between the two of you to coordinate.
Yeah.
And if we can make it, that'd be
Yep.
great.
Okay,
Like to
that
sit on a
sounds
couple
good.
of
Yeah,
those.
we'll keep you posted. All right, I think that's everything I have.
You just
Oh,
wanted the
yes,
comments?
so if you could just review the background chapter and give me any feedback you have by Friday the 28th of February, that would be really great. And is there a date scheduled for the next meeting?
There's not, but Laura was interested in that also.
Okay. Yeah,
What I'm
so-
trying to do, and these folks have been through quite a bit over the last year, so I'm trying to make sure, especially where we're at, is to devote the majority of time at any given agenda to one thing. You being that one thing today, except that there's also gonna be a follow-on discussion about the RFP. Laura's gonna need a meeting that's substantively hers and that
Yeah.
you would be an add-on to. What we've been trying to do is too ambitious. There's just too many things that we're trying to delve into. We're not being thorough enough to
Yeah.
be able to finish them.
We're okay with not coming to the one Laura's doing, but I'm wondering if it probably makes sense for us to come after the focus groups are finished, so we can actually give you a general idea of what happened there.
Sure.
I was
Then that
about
would
to
work
suggest
out,
that
because
too.
we probably need a nearer term one in mid-March for Laura.
Yeah.
And then a follow-on one after the 25th, I guess, or early April, to follow up with you folks.
Okay.
And it makes absolutely great sense, as they were saying to us, it would be circular listening if we were there participating anyway. They're there to give input so that it'll turn into our action plan, but we'd be listening to ourselves if we weren't there to participate.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know how easy it is for you guys to schedule dates far out in advance, but it is definitely easier for us to know as far out as we can, just since our calendars do fill up quickly. So if it's possible for you guys to schedule both the March and April date around the same time, that would be great, and if you could just let us know as soon as you can.
Oh, we'll be setting that at the end of this meeting.
Great. That's everything for me.
Any
Did-
questions, guys?
Did you want to finalize the forum date today, or?
Why don't I get back to you with some.
Yeah, we have a question being in.
Oh, yes.
Hi, Art.
But yeah, we can, for the forum, I think that we will probably want you guys to be there, and so I just want to look at our calendar and figure out what would be.
Just identify yourself, because every meeting is self-contained.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Art Bowden, Housing Committee. You gave me the opportunity to at the beginning of the meeting to talk, but I just waited until I had something to talk about. On the action plan, do you have a copy of the housing production plan?
Yes.
You do? Have you? Okay, I'm not going to ask you if you read it.
Yes.
I'm rereading it right now, and I'll tell you, I'm picking out a lot of information that I didn't pick the first time I read through it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of field that's already been plowed
Yep.
in that plan.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of comments, but I'm just going to drop one out here. If you want to get a little flavor of what's going on in town and what some of the voices are, come to a planning board meeting and come to a zoning board of appeals meeting that has anything to do with housing on it. And you're going to hear some good stuff.
Yeah, the last two are pretty good.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah?
We spent part of the time tooling around town with that narrative, Art.
Yeah. Are
Thank
they all
you.
videoed as well?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we
Yeah,
can
we
actually
just
watch them.
the videos.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to lay it out. There was one primary theme, if you will, to your point, Art. It isn't just about affordable housing. There is a really large held sentiment in the community that we don't want rentals either. We just want people owning their houses, and we don't want anything that has to do with a rental. Doesn't matter whether it's affordable or not, because that's what's going on in the center of town. So part of what we have to discuss is this really going to tear the town asunder and make it look unrecognizable if we do this in addition to what we've been doing? Because it's more than just affordability that we're up against.
I don't know, my sense was there were very few voices that were that negative. Maybe I was in a bubble.
Yeah.
You know?
They are out there.
Yeah, I was a little surprised. But they identified themselves as having moved here just a few years ago, but maybe moving here because that didn't exist. Yeah,
We're escaping from that.
that, those people. So, yeah, great.
You know, but I mean, that's the point of getting people into the room too who aren't in agreement with you, is you get better understand exactly, okay, so how do you feel and why?
Right.
Because is it really plausible? I mean, are your fears actually gonna come true if this happens? So I don't see any other way to approach this, to break down the barriers, other than just make sure that you're hearing where the potential blowback could be and have an answer for it.
And could I ask you guys to do one thing? And this is from my graduate school days. There was I think I had mentioned this the last time, or in something, in Keene, New Hampshire. They did I don't know what the correct term is, a community, like a 2-day workshop where they had the community reimagine what it would look like in 10 or 20 years. And it, because this was happening, there was a lot of development. The university there was growing, a lot more people were moving in. It had become a very popular location, and it really changed. It was changing rapidly, and you could just see if there's some report that you could read on that, or just some background. It really helped the community come together and to agree on development steps. And I know we've talked in the past about like the different segments of development that really need to, at some point, be in the same room in Harwich.
Yeah, we
But it was an interesting
I would like to
vehicle.
look at that.
Yeah.
We do a lot of work on master plans and community visions, and we'll
I
often.
think that's what it's called, community visioning.
Or it might be a charrette, they might have called it, very similar. And when we get to when we're ready to start designing the public forum,
Yeah.
we should talk about what you think would work the best and what kinds of questions we really want to ask people, and what that we can really tailor the design of the public forum to what we want to try to understand from the people who are coming.
I have a large hope, because sometimes it's better to be lucky than skillful. We're at a point where we're actually redesigning our comprehensive plan. And if there's any serendipity in this, I'm hoping that we get to hire the consultant for that right around the time this is still being discussed, because
Should all be.
it really should be organically part of the comprehensive plan also.
Right.
The one that we're operating off of took out a whole bunch of visioning. It was mostly build, baby, build for economic development's sake.
Really?
And it never really came to anything because nobody followed it. So this one's gonna be the other way around. We're gonna build it up from the bottom again.
Yeah.
And some of this stuff is not so much duplicative, but it actually creates critical mass for our discussion here.
And the first line in that is, Harwich is what did it call, a summer resort.
Yeah, that's the
And-
kickoff to the
Rather than a
plan.
thriving year-round.
A summer resort community. I was like, well, I'm one of
That
those
was the kicker.
one of those sad people who take care of it during the winter so
When
that
the
everybody
yeah.
can show back up again.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
we're excited for the future.
Yeah.
That it, yeah.
Well, that was everything that we were hoping to cover.
Yeah.
We can work on dates for all these next steps. We have a bunch of things to kind of pin down, but we're happy to do that offline with Belinda and Don.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm feeling progress.
Good. And we can get you with some corrections of mistakes I noticed. I'll get you that PowerPoint so you can put it online if you want.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, or share it or whatever you'd like to do with it.
Thank you for the handouts. This is really
And if you also have comments on the maps, feel free to include those with.
Those are cool. Those are great.
All right. Now, if only I had my agenda. Here. gonna have to really scoot at this point, because there's a bunch of things that I
Sure.
definitely have to cover. It only says a possible vote for the proposals. You got the draft of what Laura Schufelt gave to us.
PLP, yeah.
Pretty much this is pro forma stuff. You can't do this on an ad hoc basis. You get 4 plans and like, wow, that's the one I really love. It has to be front-loaded with, you know, giving bonus points for certain things. Remember, you owe me.
I'll email you.
The 3 names. So with that, I mean, there's not a lot of rocket science in how to get started. And I already told Laura, I've got to tell you folks, that we have a real challenge here, because the same person who was the chair of this was also the town administrator. We are really backed up in RFPs in town, including the sewering stuff. I mean, there's just a ton of things in the queue. So just understand that that's going to be a slight near-term impediment to getting anything done. I brought it up to the Board of Selectmen last meeting that we needed to be able to have them understand that within the context of the action list that they've got, that we need some stuff.
Okay.
And it's really important to us that some effort be made into that. Larry, you still with us?
I'm still with you, but Brendan is gonna call me back because the video is open. I have audio.
Yeah, let me do that again.
He turned very pale.
Usually happens an hour into it for some reason. They always bump them off.
Got it?
Perfect.
Okay, now, you can get highly qualified, qualified and not qualified. Qualified would be things like the design requirements that, yeah, they gotta put a septic in. And, yeah, if we get a quad out of it, that's nice. Now, highly qualified could be with a wraparound porch and has an innovative adaptive sewer kind of arrangement, and there's a whole bunch of things that work on a small scale. So, or photovoltaic cells on the shingling. But those would wind up being a way to rate a project that has those things as superior, ultimately. But recognize, again, we're given the land. I'm not sure that how much money we want to give within the context of that. So it isn't as expansive as this 4-page document might imply. There's not a lot of wiggle room in this. But you can decide, yeah, unless it has, then it's not qualified at all. Are you guys following me, or am I
No,
like
I get
totally
you.
baffling everybody? So whatever the criteria is has to be done before the RFP comes out, because you can't pick a developer except within the confines of what it is you stated up front that you're going to give points for.
Okay.
So, again, I took our consultants out there. Laura is very familiar with the property because she was there when we made a run in the mid-2000s at trying to develop that mixed use. The good news is that we did get the letter from HJT, Kit Kat Community Theater Company, and they are supportive. I remember saying this to Bob Murray in the mid-2000s. It is so much easier to do the project if it's done in cooperation with different people who aren't necessarily part of the housing community. You know, you have the arts now. In that area, they're probably going to have to make sure that we that it's compatible in design to the historic district. Doesn't have to be historic because,
It can't be historic.
yeah, but it can give you roof lines that are like.
I mean, because it's kind of
But
new, right?
the point is, when we were looking at that, there was a definite difference between the hack plan and the hash plan. The hack plan looked like a barracks. It was two
I see what you're
rectangles.
saying. Yeah.
The hash plan had roof lines that looked Cape Cod-y, like a Cape Cod cottage, and wraparound porch, which was evocative of the Greek revivals.
Fit right in.
Yeah, so it's not like we're trying to make something historic, but if it's evocative and it actually fits in,
Sure.
It's like what was done at 7-Eleven for the new convenience store that's going in. The first generation of that just didn't work.
Yep.
The owners worked with the historic commission and waiting to see what's gonna be built there. The plans are available to look at, but it came out very nice.
so
That process.
I don't expect you to vote on this right now, but if you had any thoughts, I'd like you to bring them up right now, if you did have them. Otherwise, that's what the homework assignment is. What would fit in the bucket of qualified, and what fits in the bucket of highly qualified? Because the highly qualified is the inducement add-on, premium add-ons, you know, whether it's design features or. And you could get other stakeholders involved, because if this turns out to be, as Gomes Way did, a showpiece for everybody has photovoltaic cells on their roofs, and they're much more efficient houses than, the standard housing stock. That's something you might be able to get, people, environmental support for.
And the design would work because it's facing, the north side the front is facing the north side, so any solar would be on the back, so that would work in the plan for, historic, I'm sure.
She did indicate that there was money, whether there was small scale, large scale MHP money, that there was money available for the small scale that we're looking for. There wasn't any for mid and higher,
large,
upper
right.
scale at the moment. And we couldn't do a high density enough. Off the top of our head, and I tend to agree, it's either gonna be 2 quads or 3 quads. The third quad actually puts you in a position where your design changes and you probably can't do the wraparound porches anymore, because there isn't enough room. So as you visualize what it is you're thinking of, those are the moving parts. You only have just so much land for parking. We're probably gonna have to consider what's gonna have to happen with the farmer's market.
Is,
You mean parking for them?
Yep.
so if they were to use the Historic Society's parking lot, that's probably never been enough.
That's minuscule.
And the same with the junior theater.
Yeah, well, actually, yes and no, because the junior theater would never have, most of that's pick up and drop off for classes and rehearsals.
They usually have about 10.
Yeah, 8 or 10
8
cars
or
at
10
most.
cars.
But
Yeah.
that's not the same as the farmer's market. That's far, on the other hand,
Maybe
Orleans decided to find itself a more permanent place for the farmer's market, and that had parking.
Maybe move the farmer's market to cultural center.
Don't know, but I particularly want to make sure that we don't step on people's toes, because
Right.
coming out of the gate, what we want to do is cooperation, not
Exactly.
co-option.
Yeah. And there would be someone to invite. Got it.
Yeah.
Because this cycle-wise would not, if everything fell into place, it wouldn't kick off for this summer anyway.
No.
Okay, so we have time to have meetings.
Larry can probably
this
visualize
group
this
and
more than
that
anybody.
group.
The things that you were talking about, do you get additional points for solar or for unique septic systems or some type of unique design? How you do it, I don't know, but I think that's a good idea. We should probably explore that too, because everything that we put in there, everything has an effect on whatever else comes. So you got to be very careful at this stage.
Yeah, but that's kind of what I'm saying to everybody. So I don't care about throwing things against the wall in this meeting right now.
Yeah.
The reason you got this is, I said to Laura, do you think we're going to come out of the room voting on an RFP? And she said, no.
Yeah, okay.
That's not the
Good.
objective here. But we all agree that this is like our success model.
Yeah.
This is what we want to do to show that we can cooperate with people. It can actually build something and it looks nice.
And it's smack in the middle of town.
Yeah.
Everyone is going to actually see it, do you know? So,
Yeah, I mean,
On top of seeing it.
and there's other things too. Do we want it 75-25, or do we want it 100% affordable? I mean, as bonus points, hard to know. I don't have any answers. I got some opinions, but we all need to weigh in on that.
Right.
Yep, I mean, because you're gonna see it a lot more here, like Judith said, than up at Hawks Nest. So you're gonna sell this one and sell it good, this is gonna be, a determining factor.
Okay. So, homework.
Homework.
Take this home. We need
I
to,
could do that by the pool, too.
Yes, we can.
I didn't need to hear that.
And today I had a meeting for, not for this stuff, but I had a meeting with Mass Development about my work. And then we talked about, water commissioner, and I'm also in the housing, because we were talking about the governor's, they are trying to push housing for the state. And apparently, and he's gonna reach out to you and to Charlene. The state has a new financial portfolio that the towns have to agree to use, but it's geared for developers for affordable housing, and the rates are much more competitive, I guess. It allows a little buffer, so that sweet spot that disappears when you're doing affordable housing very often for a developer gets put back in to a certain extent. Just, which is awesome. I mean, so we'll be hearing more about that over the next month or
Excellent.
two.
I mean, again,
Progress,
it is
exactly.
progress, but when we're coming down to this, just,
Yeah,
it's modest, it's something that's doable,
yeah.
but then there's probably only about 4 or 5 moving parts on the bonus parts.
Okay.
And under the governor's plan, this is smart development, it's right in the middle of town.
Sure,
Probably it hits that button too, yeah,
does.
absolutely.
hits the RTA button also.
Oh, yeah, it's right on the line.
In every way possible, this, and that's why I want the Harwich Center Initiative people to be involved. Because they're
So
looking at
that's
building
still a
stuff, but
group. That
you're not,
didn't
you
get
don't,
They're on a
disbanded?
pause right now.
They're on a
Yeah.
pause.
but
Okay.
I've actually asked Dan Wolf to get more involved in this, because what they can't do is they can't throw buckets of money at stuff, and nobody's gonna put their capital at risk if they don't have a business plan that shows some people.
Yeah,
Whether they're worker people or client people, they need people.
yeah.
So this, working hand in hand with them, if we're talking about that place on Bank Street, and that gets redeveloped to rentals, and this occurs, and we've got a bus route, and it's already starting, there's some economic development cash from private people that is
Right,
going
the
in.
centers, yeah.
So, I mean, this could all congeal into something realistic that no one party could do by itself, which hopefully is the model for what we're gonna do. All right, so,
Great.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
On your request for input.
Yeah.
Is what's the time frame on here? I would like to volunteer the Housing Committee to put their 2 cents on this.
yeah, sure. But I'd like it within a week, I mean, if it's possible, because then they've got to grind it out and put it into an agenda and make sure that everybody is familiar with what everybody said.
Well,
So
I
we
can
send
do
notes?
something. We'll do something.
Okay,
Thank you.
terrific.
Send it to Belinda.
So this
Send-
is part of this will be part of the next agenda for next month. So this is the creation of a development strategy. And so this is when you're looking at number of units, responsible parties, what types of housing, the visuals, public road access, septic access, proximity to commerce and all that. So this is,
See, almost all of that's kind of locked in because of the parcel.
right.
The frontage is the frontage. It's got to go where it's got to go. It's got to go to the southeast part of that property.
Configuration of units.
Yeah, and I think we're all agreed that we're shooting for rentals. We're not shooting for condo housing or something.
Right.
So most of that gets locked in just by virtue of what it is and where we're at right now. We did discuss, we haven't voted on it, but throw it into the hopper. We did discuss that one of the ways that we could give the contribution would be by a 99-year lease as opposed to money. and try to hold back the money as much as possible because we're giving equity in terms of land that a developer wouldn't have to go out and secure. So if that's something that sounds like something you want to do, then throw that in, and we'll see where we're
Design
at.
priorities.
Yeah.
Materials, types of materials you want to use, quality of materials, integration with open space.
And again, part of that is we've adopted certain building codes, so you're locked in the minimum, and what you're really looking for is what
I can help with
what the
that.
bonus level is, and, okay. But within a week, and knowing that that probably means 10 days to everybody.
10 days.
So, all right, discussion and possible vote of the, power of the chair to expend trust money. Do you, I just,
So if I recuse myself, which I'm going to.
yes.
Will you guys even be able to vote?
No.
No, so should we table this for next time?
Yes.
Yes.
And it's not, by the way, it's not that no one has been selected for this, because that was mentioned earlier. Joe is the acting town administrator. If you look at the bylaw that created us, it's an ex officio position. The selectmen don't appoint unless there is an alternate that's to be sent. It's just a question of there's too many competing interests right
He
now.
would be considered the alternate in that situation.
He is the person, he's not the alternate, he's holding the position that would sit
Okay.
here.
Yep, exactly.
I don't think he wants to relinquish that by giving it to an ex officio, another ex officio designee. So I'll check with him about that. If we could just kind of muddle through, our timeline on the Board of Selectmen is we're going to have a full-time town administrator sometime between April and May.
Great.
So
And
this is a
Larry,
short-term problem.
You come back in May?
No.
April.
We get back long before then,
April, right?
April.
And if we hit the right week, we'll have you here physically.
I would like to make sure that I get home in time for taxes, but I would suspect that I'll be home the first week or so of April.
Oh, okay, you're fine.
I want to wait until after the end of the month, because I-95 looks like a racetrack at the end of the month in Florida. Everybody's headed north after the rentals are over.
So
Probably
we're delaying that, put that back on next week's
Yeah,
agenda,
the
or next month's agenda.
April.
Briefly, I mean, just moving down to the Affordable Housing Trust and Affordable Housing Committee, we did hold a joint meeting. I thought it was fruitful. I mean,
It's great.
anybody wants to jump in. It actually was analogous to what Jim Goldson was saying to us relative to what the various roles were, because we had that discussion at the meeting about what it is we were going to anticipate each of our roles would be. I thought it was a very productive meeting, and I enjoyed having it. We're going to do more of those.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree.
Hmm?
I agree. It
Was,
was a good
yeah.
meeting.
Okay. Anybody have any member reports of anything that they've been up to outside of the room here? You don't have to. It's just, there may not be anything to report, but I'm putting it here so that you have the opportunity.
Nothing you want to hear from me.
Yeah.
I don't want to know how many times you went to fill up the pina colada.
Which is something that was brought up at our joint meeting, because I'm on the Historic Commission, we are seeing a lot of people come to us for permission to renovate or knock down their garages and create apartments. So that's in motion. The ADUs are slowly happening. And the building department has received about 7 requests for that. So there's some movement on that.
Excellent.
There's hope.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Belinda.
Okay, so the trust balance is the same, $868,355. It does not include the action plan invoice and our quarterly invoice from community development.
Working on it.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't include what's being recommended at town meeting this year.
Right, right.
So
So
with
it's
any luck,
moving target.
we will replenish what we're spending at the moment.
And do you guys have any questions about the January monthly report? If you had a chance to look at it, one thing to note is that last month was the most citizen outreach that I've had. So that's a good sign.
That concludes your report.
I'm
I
sorry?
have no questions. I think it was a good report. You had a busy month.
Yes, busy month in terms of citizen outreach, but that concludes my report.
Okay, terrific.
Great, thank you.
To the fun part of the agenda building. Anybody wants something on next month's agenda that they don't think we've covered or would like to discuss?
I'm good.
I'm good.
I think we got it.
Okay, I just want to make sure everybody has an opportunity.
No, I was just gonna say, I think, just make sure that that's on there again. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, meeting dates. So let's try to set 2 of them, because we know when Larry is shooting to get back. We need one in March, and then we need another one not too far from that in kind of like second week of April.
So March is the 19th. That's the third Thursday.
If that's what we want to do.
And then April will be the 9th or the 16th.
You know me, I'm all about accommodating different needs. I don't,
Larry, is the 9th too close time frame for April, or do you want to do the 16th?
Do the 15th.
That's a Wednesday.
you mean the 16th?
That's fine.
The 16th.
Or
Yeah.
Whatever day, yeah, sometime in the middle of the month, that's fine.
So
April 16th.
April 16th and then March
Yeah.
19th.
By that time, I should have my taxes done and be dead broke.
Geez, it's too bad you said that. I was hoping to hit you up when you got your refund check.
That never happens.
All right,
Um,
what about the 19th? Is it?
We haven't solidified any dates for the focus group because I'm cross-referencing it with
I
other
am
meetings.
going on a trip. I
I'm
will-
sorry, you
I
did
won't be
not,
back for
you did
April
not
9th.
submit a request
I
for
know.
leave.
It just hit me now. Well, I made the mistake of planning my trip, not realizing.
You
it
made
was-
the mistake
it
of
was
getting on
Easter
this,
morning I'm
buddy.
leaving.
Oh,
So my brother-in-law made that mistake, so we're leaving Easter morning on a trip, so.
When is Easter
When
this
is
year?
Easter this
It's
year?
the 12th of April.
Oh,
I found that out the hard way.
Will you be
So-
back for the 19th?
No, I'll be back late on the 16th. I'll be here for the 19th, but I'm saying the meeting on the 16th,
Oh,
I may
16th.
not be here. That was the point I was trying to make.
Well, we need you.
Yeah, unless we move it to Friday. On the
I don't have a
17th.
problem with that. Does anybody else?
I think I do have a conflict on Friday. Could we do Monday or Tuesday, the 21st?
Yeah,
Is that too late?
No, I'd be able to do any of those days.
How does the 21st sound for you? Tuesday?
Tuesday's fine by me.
Yeah, that works.
All right,
so
Thanks,
April
guys.
21st,
let's shoot for that.
Appreciate that.
2 p.m.
Yep. And my whole point, I'm just gonna repeat it because if anybody just sees this one meeting and not other meetings, my whole point of this is, it doesn't have to be that we do the meeting and wow, we didn't get any from the public coming in, so why did we even bother? It's an opportunity. So if we move things around, if we move the times around, we move the dates around to different days, it's an attempt to make sure that we give the opportunity to people, should they elect to take the opportunity.
Yeah.
I don't care whether 20 people showed up or not. It does matter to me if we deliberately set something up so that we're stopping people from showing up.
Yeah.
Because at this juncture, we need all of the stakeholders as partners that we can get. And it'd be nice to get as many people with
Right.
us.
And we haven't had that yet, so once that moves with the focus groups and then to the forum,
They were
It's a
kind of
pretty good
surprised when they were driving through Harwich about, it may not be hitting 10%. We're in the sevens at this point.
5 point.
I thought it was 7.1 or something.
Oh, I didn't even think we were at 5.
No, we
Thought
were at 5.
4 point something. Okay.
I mean, things drop off, which is unfortunate because we didn't used to do perpetuity. But there's a lot of places out there, and I did take them on the trip to Dennisport. and pointed out that South Dennis and Chatham were virtually identical. From the roadway, there's just a glom of places.
Yeah.
In Chatham, it's across from the industrial park. It's like, it was a way to just chomp off a whole bunch of units and bump up your town's assets by about 1 or 2%, and then walk away and feel good for a couple of years. And she did remark that how well we had done as you drive through Harwich, where it's not like that. It's like there's, if you didn't know and I didn't tell you which were the affordable ones, you'd never know. Most of the Pine Oak properties are way back, and they're designed to be communities.
Even the Blueberry Motel is way back, you can't see it, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the Hesh properties, but then ironically, there's a market rate one in the middle of town that is obvious, but that's not affordable housing. That's just rental. So,
And it still has a for sale sign on it.
and I still think about that almost every day, Larry. But if we had, it would require money. And that place, speaking of rehab, it would be the very definition of a money pit.
Probably be better
Let
to
it
tear
be
it down
somebody
and
else's
rebuild
money.
it.
That's something that we talked about in the car, because not everything we do is going to be us doing it. It's going to be maybe, supporting people doing it with either money or a forum. But everything's got to be done publicly so that everybody has some assurance that there's nothing going on in the background.
No problem, it'll come up in tax title.
Well, I'm thinking more of the sewers. I don't want anybody thinking that we're gaming the system to build stuff for something else, because it's not happening that way. All right, any other comments? I appreciate everybody's efforts.
Don,
No other comments, I'll move we be adjourned.
can I add one thing? I'm taking off my housing coordinator hat. We have our 2020 peer group meeting coming up, and it's scheduled. Again, it's a quarterly housing conversation for municipal officials and town staff. For the Lower Cape, it's scheduled on Thursday, March 5th, at 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. It's going to be located in Brewster Town Hall, and we've invited Stephanie Cox of Nexus Works to talk about the ADU bylaw, the success of the ADU bylaw since the 2019 annual town meeting. And then for the second half of the meeting, she'll facilitate a discussion comparing bylaws across towns. So it's going to be a great peer group meeting. It's
What time on the
informal. 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., Thursday, March 5th, at Brewster Town Hall.
Okey doke.
Light refreshments will be provided. Pre-registration is required, so if you like to join, and I'd love for you guys to join, let me know, email me, and I'll register you guys.
No more business. We got Larry giving a motion to adjourn. Any second?
Second.
We are adjourned.